for today and turn it over to him. Our moderator is Senator Larry Taylor, who represents Senate District 11, which is down in the Galveston, Houston area. Larry attended Baylor University, graduated with a BBA in 1982, and he currently runs Taylor Insurance Agency in Friendswood. He serves on a number of Senate committees, Senate Business and Commerce, Senate Education, which we're all interested in, or we wouldn't be in this room, Government Organization, Health and Human Services, Intergovernmental Relations Committee, and also on the Texas Energy Council. You senators work a lot harder than we did when you were in the House, don't you?
And we didn't used to say that when I was in the House.
He's been named as a taxpayer's advocate by Texans for Fiscal Responsibility, a champion of free enterprise by the Texas Association of Business, and a courageous conservative by the Texas Conservative Coalition. But my favorite thing is I've noticed in recent months, attending some of these conferences, Larry actually sits through the conferences and listens to some of the presentations, unlike many of us that have been in politics that attended the luncheons and then go home. So with that, I want to thank you, Larry, for your participation and guidance and leading this panel today. Turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, Ken. I guess I do go to the conferences and I try to learn as much as I can because I'm a slow learner. I guess my other colleagues already know it all and don't need these things. But I have noticed a lot of our fellow legislators here at this conference this year. We have a substantial number, like 92 signed up. And I've seen a number of them sitting here in conference meetings as well. As far as introductions, you have them in your books, but I'll just give you real quick who we have with us today. Leading off is going to be Dr. Walberg down there on the end. He's with the Heartland Institute, and he's chairman of the board of directors for the Heartland Institute. We see quite a bit around the legislature here. He's also a distinguished visiting fellow at the Hoover Institution and a member of the Correct Task Force on K-12 education, a professor emeritus at the University of Scholars, University of Illinois at Chicago, and and Harvard. That's that little school in Boston, I think, right?
Yeah, East Coast.
Yeah. And his research is focused on educational productivity and human accomplishments. And then our next speaker, Louis Malfaro, is with the Texas American Federation of Teachers. And he was just talking about he actually taught at a school within just a few minutes of here and grew up here, very close to where we are today. So I guess we're not really welcoming him from out of town. But he is the Secretary-Treasurer of the Texas American Federation of Teachers. He's the President of Education Austin, where he led the successful effort to gain democratically elected representation for school employees in Austin. Under his leadership, Education Austin negotiated numerous agreements with the Austin School District on behalf of district employees. And lastly, we have Dr. Ginn,
Yes.
who is with TPPF. He's an economist in the Center for Fiscal Policy at the Texas Public Policy Foundation. And prior to joining this foundation in 2013, he was a Charles B. Koch Summer Fellow. He received his BBA in Economics and Accounting with minors in Political Science and Mathematics. That's a little bit more education than I got. And Mathematics before earning his PhD, which is way beyond what I got, in Economics from Texas Tech University. So, and you missed your chancellor was up there, your former chancellor was up there just a few months ago.
I didn't miss it.
Oh, you were there? Well, that was a great discussion. I really
was.
enjoyed that. What a historical moment to have those two figures up there talking about such a historical figure. But in this panel today, we're supposed to be talking about teachers and teacher pay. And I think we can all agree that a good teacher plays one of the most important roles in our society today. And beyond that, I think a truly outstanding teacher doesn't see it just as a job. For a truly outstanding teacher, this is a calling, and it's something they are passionate about. But unfortunately, many of our teachers today, even those who are great teachers, are dissatisfied with their job. And we've heard some of the discussions, some of the other panels I've listened in on. Discipline in the classroom is not what they would like. It's hard to teach kids when you can't keep them under somewhat of a controlled setting, and they don't feel like they have a lot of support from sometimes at home or sometimes even their own administration, and that's a frustration that they have. And then there's just the general, what they perceive as a lack of respect. And I think that has certainly changed over my lifetime and even before mine, how much more respect we gave teachers in that profession versus where a lot of times I think the perception are today that they're not as put on such a high level. And I think that's an unfortunate thing. And then there's also the thing about pay. And of course you hear more about pay, I guess it's one of those more tangible things we get our hands on. And you hear some teachers complain about pay. And I gotta tell you, I agree with just about all of those things at varying degrees of why a teacher today might be dissatisfied. But today we're gonna be talking about teacher pay specifically. And I think, you know, if I was a good teacher in today's classroom, I think there's plenty of reasons to be irritated as a good teacher in a classroom. You could walk onto any campus in this state and you ask those staff, students, anyone else, who are the best teachers on this campus, and they can tell you, they can list them off for you. And you ask them who the worst teachers are, and they can list them off to you. Everyone there knows it. And guess what? They all get paid the same. And then you got the teacher that shows up at 7 a.m. and sees students beforehand, stays through lunch and tutors kids, stays after school, tutoring kids, and then prep, you know, doing her lesson plans, changing, modifying for the kids she has in that year, not using the same lesson plan she had for 4 or 5 years. And then you have the teacher across the hall who shows up right ahead of the kids and leaves right behind the kids. And they get paid the same. And then you have the teachers who are really very good at what they do. And there are other teachers who it is a job. It's something they wanted to do to make money. They thought that the schedule worked out well for them, and that's what they do to get a check. And one of them's really good at what they do, their kids learn a lot, and the other one's not motivated, they're not advancing, and they get paid the same. So if you're a good teacher in today's classroom, I can understand that frustration. That would be very frustrating, and I would not feel valued as a professional in what I'm doing. So how do we make that transition where teachers are valued and seen as professionals in their field, and this most important task we've asked them to do, to train up the future of our great state and frankly our country? How do you make that transition? So that's what we're going to talk about today. You know, I'll tell you one other thing I see. We have teachers who are in the high, you know, we have a need for high-level math and science in today's classroom. And we have a lot of teachers that are having to teach outside their field to fill those gaps. Well, in the marketplace, what do when you need more of something and maybe not as much as something else? You pay more to entice people to come into those fields. And unfortunately, we have very limited resources and availability and options to do that in today's classroom. So at this point, I'm going to turn over to our folks on the panel here and give them an opportunity to give that. And then we've got a couple questions that I'll have from here, and then we'll open the floor to questions from you. So if you would, as you're listening to hear some good question, feel free to share that with us in just a minute. Dr. Walberg?
Thanks very much. I'm very pleased to be with you here today. I've written a lot about the benefits of school choice for student achievement and satisfaction. But our invitation from this organization wants to review literature on the benefits, largely speaking, to teachers, which is sometimes not the main subject of some of the debates on, I'm going to avoid that V word and call them scholarships or learning choices, and also charter schools. There's a huge interest in expanding school choice in the United States. And I'm just going to mention one other form that at least was shocking to me when I suggested to the government in Sweden that the reason that their kids were not doing very well is that they should have more choice in their systems. And the government of Sweden decided that every school district would have to pay private providers for schooling. And one of the nicest things about it is that 10 years later, 2 economists from the University of Stockholm researched the results of that, and they found that the kids that were in private schools did better. But even more impressive, and I don't know if I've ever heard of anyone in this country recommending it, but I just want to illustrate what other countries are doing. I'm not going to go into Korea, which also employs a lot of choice, but Sweden, within 2 years of passing this legislation had more than 10 private for-profit providers. And in 5 cases, they had more than 5 schools each. And so it did interject a kind of competition that only capitalism can provide, rather than that which is limited to government rules and regulations. I think one of the ways that's interesting to characterize public education today is the way that Henry Ford, when he was asked about the colors of his Model T, he said, you can have any color you want, as long as it's black. And right now, school parents, and I think parents ought to be the major decision makers. They can listen because they know their children best. But parents should have a major role in selecting which schools to go to. And so I think we're on the dawn of some really exciting times. And I think some of you here know better than me if you look at the statistics. Charter schools and scholarships around the country, it's just growing hugely, and I'm very optimistic about it, largely because, as I said, I did one book for Hoover and another book for the Cato Institute in Washington. If you look at the bulk of the research that's been done, and there have been dozens, if not hundreds of studies, suggests that the private provisioning of schooling is superior with respect to students. But our topic today is benefits to teachers. And I'm not going to be limited to teacher salary. Actually, I was trained as a psychologist, and I'm going to mention some things about teacher salary, but if you think about full compensation, part of it has to do with whether you're satisfied in your job. And a lot of people would deny simply a salary alone if they were unhappy with the people that they work with. And so I will touch on some of those things. We have some major problems with financing schools in the United States, remembering that roughly about 88% are public schools, but we typically, in the last 25 years, have been first, second, or third in the per student expenditures. Huge amounts of money per student. And it's not just because we're a big student country, it's the per student expenditures, and yet, if you look at international achievement comparisons, in which the same test, translated to the appropriate languages, is given, the United States is mediocre at best. And in one study that was done several years ago, it's hard for me to believe it, but that's what it indicated. The United States was ranked 26th among countries throughout the world in the field of mathematics among elementary and secondary school students. So money is extremely important, but also important is student achievement and also satisfying teachers. One of the things that's really appalling is how much money we spend on federal, state, and district rules and regulations. One indication of that is the total amount of money that's actually spent on teaching or instruction. I got the figures for Texas. And by the way, in the paper with the green on top, I have all the figures, and I have a lot of examples on Texas, so you can read that at your leisure. I won't have time to go through the footnotes and all the rest. But 48 million was spent on in Texas in 07-08, but less than half of that amount was actually spent on instruction. And one of the reasons for it is you have people at the state level, district level, and the school level, all kinds of specializations enforcing rules and regulations. So the major point that I would like to make about teacher pay is that huge amount of money could be used in private schools that don't have to follow all these rules and regulations. So there's one way to increase the salaries of teachers in private schools, including the closing, maybe not all, but the closing of many public schools on the grounds, as I'm going to illustrate, that teachers in private schools are far more satisfied with what they do. And so that is a major consideration, just as you wouldn't want to work at a place where people gave you rules and regulations. They would like to, in a sense, and if you look at the history of research on professions, the classic professions or medicine, law, and the clergy. And the two characteristics that distinguish them is that they were autonomous. They were trained, of course, but they could use whatever medicine or law or when they were preaching, they were in control of things. And so that is very, very appealing, and it's one way to think about professions. On the other hand, teaching in this country, because the federal government, I should name Common Core, which I understand is not being used in Texas, but a great number of other states around the country are using Common Core, where it's a federally sponsored task force that's telling people in schools what the curriculum should be. And the whole idea of school choice, as I think about it, is decentralization. And by that I mean, we're not going to have things like Common Core, which originated at the federal level. The state would be their role would be greatly diminished, as well as the district, and even to some extent the schools, so that the teachers would have much greater control over curriculum, instruction, and things of that nature. The other feature that should be mentioned about private schools, and now emphasizing again, morale. Money is important, but satisfaction of teachers is also important, and I do want to emphasize that. In private schools, the teachers, they can look at various opportunities that they have, but they can choose their principal. They want to go to this school because Mrs. Jones is really very, very friendly and supportive and all those other things. And in addition to that, it is very, very attractive for some students and some teachers to have specialized programs. So why not go to a school that emphasizes, let's say, music or art or even the trades? I would like to mention to you today, if you have time, the Wall Street Journal has a very interesting article about a young man who's about 23, as I recall, and he makes $140,000 a year as a welder. And if you take the typical college graduate, what would you say? Maybe they'd be lucky to get $40,000. So he's getting 3 times as much, or $100,000 more a year than the typical college graduate. And he acquired this interest while he was in high school. And then he had another 18 months at a specialized trade school where you could study welding in great depth. And some people feel that in the future, in the past, as I've been around quite a long time, having been born in 1937, I've seen some changes. In the old days, in elementary school, high school, and college, it was all liberal arts. And I was brought up in that tradition. But bachelor's degrees are getting to be a dime a dozen. And simply having a bachelor's degree in sociology or history or another field does not guarantee you a job. Another feature of private schools is that not only can the principal and the teachers choose each other, but the kids, because of their own interests, can go to a school that has, especially in big cities, but there are other ways too. One of the things that I'll just briefly mention is we live in the age of the internet. Has anybody in this room not heard of Khan Academy? They have thousands of 10-minute presentations on all of the academic and many other subjects such as history and civics and so on, and you can take them for free. And you can see how a private school that's not under the heavy influence of rules and regulations could choose some of those things. Maybe they don't have a teacher in the school that's highly qualified in civics. Well, they can assign these things, and it's much to the benefit of the students. Now, I briefly mentioned Korea earlier, and Korea has, and it's been said, if we were had something like this, I'll just say this to be a little bit radical. If we had a great deal of internet, all teachers would make more than $1 million a year. All 6 of them. And they would be the best in the country. And there are such teachers in Korea. So we should think very broadly and I think radically about the great virtues of school choice. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Louis Malfaro. As was said earlier, I'm the Secretary-Treasurer of the Texas American Federation of Teachers. I am a former public school teacher here in the Austin School District, and in fact, the school I taught at, you could, for a little warmer, walk to right down 11th Street, right across the highway. It's less than a mile down the road. I think I was invited to come today, actually by Kent Grusendorf, who I thank for the invitation, because of a mutual friend, Drew Cheverly, who works at the Austin Chamber of Commerce, who worked with me when I was the president of the local teachers union here in Austin called Education Austin, when we participated together with the school district in the creation of what we called a strategic support and compensation system. And I want to make just a little bit of a mention about that and my experiences with that before I talk more generally about teacher pay in Texas. So the REACH program, as it was called, and REACH doesn't really stand for anything. It's not an acronym, was the result of the superintendent coming to us and saying, we think that we could make the argument for more money for teachers in this district if we could demonstrate the effect they were having with kids. And I said, that's a great idea. The devil's in the details. How are we going to do that? I said, and furthermore, I said, Dr. Forgione, who was the superintendent at the time, I don't believe that the teachers in this district are leaving 10 or 20% of their game at home every morning when they come to school. I think most teachers come to school every day and try as hard as they can to get the kids in their classrooms to learn. So if we're going to talk about using money to improve outcomes in our schools, we can't just talk about dangling a little bit of money in front of people and seeing if we can get them to jump a little higher. We need to talk about giving them the tools and the skills that they need to get the job done. That's our theory of change here. And the superintendent pretty much bought into it, although he did say, you know, we're going to have a really tough time not tying this somehow to the tax test at the time, now the STAR test, because everybody knows that schools in this state are mostly just measured by the high-stakes tests, which, you know, from our perspective was kind of a problem. Because the teachers in the school district felt like there was already too much emphasis on the high-stakes test, and that the last thing they wanted to see was even more pressure and more emphasis being placed on what teachers feel is a fairly narrow measure of what they do in the classroom. So we were able to, through a collaborative process, and for those of you that are familiar with the Austin School District, and as Senator Taylor mentioned, there's a very strong policy where the teachers get to elect one organization to represent them, and that organization meets regularly with the administration and has access to the school board. And it is a process that resembles what teachers in other parts of the country have through collective bargaining, but doesn't result in binding contracts. But it does result in an opportunity for teachers to sit at the table with the management of the school district and give real input. And one of the things that allowed us to do in Austin was take a risk with the school administration on an issue that we knew was going to be controversial with the teachers in the district as well as with the broader public. And you can go online now in the Austin School District and you can look at the whole REACH program. It has many components. It has some components that deal with paying teachers based on taking those harder assignments that the senator also made reference to, working in schools with very high percentages of low-income kids. There is differentiated pay for teachers who have particular skills that are in high demand, including special education teachers and bilingual teachers. And there are also metrics for measuring what teachers are doing in the classroom that we worked over time to pilot that are called student learning objectives, where teachers, in collaboration with their administrators, develop measurable, objective goals, and then work throughout the school year to meet those goals and have to demonstrate empirically that they've met them. And if they do, then they can earn additional compensation. So, what do teachers want? And this was said earlier, and it's true. They do want those green things with Benjamin Franklin on the front, but that's not all they want. Teachers want support. They want an opportunity to get better at what they do, and they want their employer to take an interest in that and invest in them. They want to, and they recognize that when you're working with very high-need students, you're challenged in a way that is different from teachers who work with more affluent or middle-class students. They want to be paid to do that after-school tutoring, and they're willing to do that, but they don't feel that it's fair to teach at a school where every kid needs to be tutored after school, and there's a school across the town where the kids don't have to stay for tutoring, and those teachers all make the same amount of money. So it is true that teachers recognize that the work is not equal everywhere. But they also know that there are problems that have to be overcome to design a system. One of them is the general underfunding of education here in the state of Texas. And I disagree with the characterization that we've spent in the United States on education. If you pull out higher ed, and also if you look at what other countries spend on other inputs on school-age children, including healthcare, childcare, and tease those out, we really are not leading the pack in what we spend on our kids. While we do very well on higher ed, on K-12 and on healthcare, we're laggards. And teachers know that that's a problem. In this state, we know that we have made cuts to public education over the course of the last several years and have still not gotten back to the levels that we were at in the late 2000s. That's a problem, because if we're serious about talking about paying teachers more, that money's gotta come from somewhere, right? I mean, if there's gonna be more money in teachers' pockets, that seems to imply that we're gonna have to fund the system. Compared to other professionals, we are underpaying teachers in this state. And if you look at the quotes in Arlene Wogemuth's article there on your chair, she acknowledges that compared to other similarly situated professionals, teachers in Texas don't get paid as much, and we know that. We know that from research that's done both within Texas and outside the state. I want to show you something else too. There's the state by state. You can just see that Texas, on the scale, red is hot and blue is cool, and we are toward the cool end of the spectrum. Now that's an average teacher salary, but you can see that Texas does not stack up particularly well compared to the rest of the country. But you say, teachers, they get a raise every year, right? One more year of experience, another step up the ladder. So I had to put one slide in and make everybody groan. That's the big slide that nobody can read. I zoomed in. So you start off in Austin as a new teacher, and you're making $44,000 a year. That's, that's on a par with what a college graduate would make coming out. Look at what teachers in Austin are making after 10 years of experience. Is that a shocker to folks? I think that would be a shocker to a lot of people in the public. Teachers in Austin with 10 years of experience make almost exactly the same as a rookie teacher. Now, if you were in a profession where after 10 years of developing your craft, you made the same as the guy coming in the door, fresh out of college, would you be highly motivated to stay in that profession? I don't think so. And so we have to admit that when we're talking about alternative pay, performance pay, looking at what somebody does, that's the icing on the cake, right? If you read research about how you motivate people using compensation, you have to have the cake first. And in Texas, there's a good argument to be made that the cake hasn't really been baked. And we want to talk about putting the icing on it. In other words, base pay is still very low, and it's hard to make forward progress. So, What do teachers want? Well, they don't want that salary schedule. They're frustrated by that. They would agree that they should be able to make more money. They would agree that market forces, including whether you're in a high needs area, should matter. Of course, there is no prohibition right now on any school district from saying, we have a shortage of math teachers, we're gonna pay math teachers $5,000 more than we pay everybody else. No prohibition on that whatsoever. School districts can do that, and many do. They pay signing bonuses, they pay stipends, they do it for bilingual teachers, they do it for special ed teachers. The only requirement that the legislature places on school district is a floor on the bottom, below which you cannot pay a teacher. And that is a very, very low floor. So, what about student learning, all right? Because a lot of people say, well, we want to get down to the nuts and bolts of this. Well, I will tell you that we tried that in Austin, and we found a way to do that with student learning objectives. Those, by the way, have been copied by school districts all across the United States. And it's something I'm particularly proud of, that we found a way to give teachers and school districts a tool to use to look at student achievement that was not tied to test scores. Why are we opposed to tying stuff to test scores? Well, test scores are not, tax tests, STAR tests, were never designed to measure the effectiveness of a teacher. They were measured to find out whether a child learned and could demonstrate knowledge in a narrow set of the curriculum. They are not particularly well linked to the curriculum. They are narrow in scope. Students are not randomly assigned to classrooms. There are a whole host of reasons why using test scores is not a fair or accurate way to measure teachers. Now, you also have unintended consequences, right? You remember the apocryphal stories of the Soviet Union, where it had a factory that was rewarded based on the tonnage of nails that it made, and it cranked out a whole bunch of really big nails, because that was the most efficient way to meet that particular objective. Or the story about the shoe factory that had to make shoes, and they were measured only by the number of shoes they produced, so they had a certain amount of material. They cut the material small and made all small shoes, because that's how they maximize their pairs of shoes. What does this have to do with schools? I've been in schools where teachers have told me, we're only tutoring one group of kids this month. It's not the kids that passed last year. It's not the pobrecitos, the little ones that are never going to pass. We're spending all our time on the kids in the middle. Why? Because all that matters is that our school gets a certain percentage of the kids to pass that test. If we don't do that, we're on the bad list and bad stuff happens. If we get that certain percentage to pass, we're not on the bad list. What about the high-performing kids? We're giving them a book. What about the kids that are really low? They're not going to pass that test anyway. So there are perverse incentives and unintended consequences to the school accountability system. You tie people's pay to those tests. That is an invitation. People's livelihoods, their ability to take home and put food on the table for their family. You are creating a hugely unpopular incentive. So, in conclusion, because I'm getting my time message, we have a system like that where we use test scores. It's in Houston. It's called EVAS. It's developed by a man named Sanders, who's an agricultural economist. He designed a way to predict the birth weight of calves based on the characteristics of the bulls and cows that were mated. And he's now claims to be able to tell which teachers are good by pumping numbers from test scores into a black box that has a proprietary algorithm that no one is allowed to see, including statistics teachers in Houston who are being evaluated using it. And yet he claims that this black box can say whether you're a good teacher or not. So my friend Andy Dewey, his numbers got pumped into the box, and 2 years ago Andy got a $4,000 stipend because his numbers said he was a great teacher. And then last year Andy's numbers said that he had no measurable impact on the growth of his students. Now Andy teaches at Carnegie Vanguard High School in Houston, which is a school that serves very high achieving kids. Kids who tend to get in the 95 to 99 percentile on almost all standardized tests, making it very difficult to both show growth or differentiation. And I point out Andy for two reasons. One is that Andy was recognized in December at the graduation of Texas A&M. Maybe somebody in the room actually attended the Aggies graduation in December. If so, you would have heard Andy receive, the only teacher in the room to get this, the Texas A&M University Inspiration Award for Exceptional Education. It was one of his former students, one of his former history students, who was taking her degree in aerospace engineering, nominated Andy as the best teacher in high school or college that she had had. So Andy receives that award. Andy's also one of 7 people who are employed by the Houston School District who are plaintiffs in a lawsuit against HISD for their unfair evaluation system being used and being driven exclusively by test scores. So I'm going to leave you with that. I'm going to ask you to ask me hard questions, and I'm going to say one other thing. If you think that introducing privatization, vouchers, is going to increase teacher pay, I would encourage you to look at 2 things. What are private school teachers making right now in Texas compared to public school teachers? I think you know the answer. And what are charter school teachers making compared to public school teachers, with the exception of a very few charter schools that receive massive amounts of foundation funding? Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Uh-oh. Oh, I forgot to say, Secretary Duncan loves the idea of evaluating teachers with test scores. So if we really want to import the Obama administration's model for evaluation, we should embrace that.
Yeah, that one.
Yes, I know.
All right, let's see. Oh, it didn't come up. Okay. Try. There we go. Let's make sure this is working. All right. Hello. How are y'all doing? So I'm Dr. Vance Ginn with Texas Public Policy Foundation. So today I want to talk a little bit about how teachers win with school choice. So imagine this. Imagine that you were all teachers and I'm the one public school in this area. Who is going to have market power? Will it be you, the teachers? Or is it me, the one public school in the area? It's gonna be me, right? So it's very hard for teachers to be able to negotiate what their salary is going to be if I'm the only consumer of teaching services in that particular market. And so what we have is a market in which it's not well functioning. And as Adam Smith talked about the invisible hand, where supply and demand come together, we can't really see it, but it's there behind the scenes that allows for this sufficient allocation of resources for a price to be determined in this market. And what we're not able to have with teachers in public schools is a well-functioning market. Because of the wages that they're unable to negotiate. And so I'd like to explain more on that here today during my presentation. So first of all, I certainly agree that good teachers should be paid more. I think we could all get behind that. And so many Texans agree. 67%, according to a 2014 Texas Tribune UT Austin poll, says that Texans say increasing teacher pay would improve educational outcomes. Teachers are paid more, do a better job maybe in the classroom. That allows for better educational outcomes to come about. Maybe the best way, which I would agree with Mr. Malfaro here, is that maybe it's not to use tests to determine whether that's the best metric to use. Maybe there are other metrics that are out there. But however you want to measure that, better teachers should be able to be paid more. So the common solution that's heard is that we need to spend more money. Spending more money will solve the problem. And that would help to increase teacher pay and increase educational outcomes and students to be able to find better jobs moving forward and things of that nature. Well, if we go back to 1972 and adjust educational spending here in public education spending here in Texas with inflation, you'll notice that spending adjusted for inflation has more than doubled since 1972. It's up about 140% since then. However, if you use one metric, of educational outcomes, SAT scores adjusted for participation and demographics, you'll notice that it's flatlined or slightly negative. And this is what we've seen across the board in many metrics that we have when we're looking at educational outcomes. So we're spending a lot more and we're not getting the benefits or the outcomes that we would like to see, which are improvement in educational outcomes for the bright young minds of tomorrow. So an issue here is that and it's been brought up before, is that most public education spending is not going to the classroom, right? And this is a huge issue. So here in Texas, total spending per student was $12,106 in 2012-13 school year. All right, so stay with me. Average elementary school class is 18 students. Average high school class size is 27 students. So you do the math, right? Multiply those together. That means Texas spends $215,000 to $325,000 per class. However, the average salary for a Texas teacher, a little over $48,000 a year. So not every dollar is going, and okay, some of that's going to brick and mortar, but a lot of that is going into bureaucracy and not going into the classroom. That's going to be able to allow for teachers to teach better and have the resources to do so, and therefore improve student outcomes in the process. And that's a huge issue. The other thing is that, as I was mentioning, public schools tend to control teacher salaries. As we mentioned before, there is this minimum 10-month salary schedule that's put in place by the state on teachers. And so it increases as the years of experience increase. It's also based on, it's not actually based on the minimum salary, it's not based on their educational background. So if you include their educational background, which 97% of teachers have a bachelor's degree or more, you'll see if they have a higher average pay. So instead of having a 10-month minimum salary of $27,540 when they come in, a teacher with a bachelor's degree would make on average $41,200. But then even more than that, teachers have many more years of experience. So 91% of teachers have more than 3 years of experience. So that also pushes up this overall average, which gets us closer to that $48,821 per year that the average teacher makes, or average salary that a teacher makes. So that's how, and so you have this sort of controls that are in place by these public schools whenever they have a large share of the market. And how much of the share of the market do they have? Well, public schools control 93% of the amount of teachers that are being hired across the state. All right? There are about 350,000 teachers in the great state of Texas. 325,000 of them are employed by public schools, leaving about a little over 23,000 that are employed by private schools. So 93% of the market share is being consumed, the teaching service is consumed by public schools. So as I mentioned earlier, imagine that you're all teachers and I'm the public school, and that's what we see in many of the places across the state. And so what this does is it doesn't allow for an efficient allocation of resources where a market can be able to allocate these resources effectively, right? So I don't want to bore you too much, right? But as an economist, I like to look at charts and graphs and things of that nature, okay? Many of us have heard of monopoly, right? You've all heard of monopoly, I'm sure. Monopoly is where you have one firm that's producing that particular good. There's no other firm that's in the market producing that particular good, right? And so what we find is the efficient output levels, where marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost, right? You might remember that in some of your Econ 101 courses. Go way back, okay? And so where they intersect, that's where you find your quantity. You go up to your demand curve, your AR, average revenue, and that's where you find your price. So price of monopoly, PM, is greater than the price in competition. And that's one of the reasons why we have what some would say market failure, is because the price is higher than it otherwise would be if we had many, many buyers and sellers in the sellers in this case, sellers in the overall market. And so we call this as a problem in this overall market when you look at a monopoly. Well, the flip side of that is what we call a monopsony in economics. I'm not making that up, all right? It's not a made-up word, a monopsony, okay? A monopsony is where there is one consumer in this particular market, or a monopsony power where you have very few consumers in the market. And as we just saw from the previous slide, 93% of the market for teaching services is consumed by who? The public school districts. So it works very much in this case of a monopsony. And so what this does, if you'll follow me, WC is our competitive wage, all right, where you have the marginal value is equal to AE, or that's going to be aggregate expenditures here. That would be our competitive market outcome. But instead of having a competitive market outcome, we have only a few consumers of teaching services. So let's look at marginal expenditures, where it equals marginal value. We go down and find our quantity that's going to be consumed of teachers, or hired, I guess you would say, and then the wage in which they're going to make here in this market. And we notice as W star M, is less than the competitive market. So what public schools are doing is, by having so much control of the market, they're also depressing wages and employment in this market too. And so if we were able to have school choice and allow for competition, we would see that wages would tend to rise and more teachers could potentially be employed as well, which is another one of the benefits of having school choice. So the testimony going on with the ongoing school finance trial addressed this very issue, where we have Dr. Jacob Vigor, who is a Harvard-trained economist, who said introducing greater competition into the market for teachers will raise teacher salaries, okay? Which goes back to maybe improving educational outcomes and increasing teacher satisfaction as well. And so overall, teachers win with school choice. Dr. Walberg actually has a paper on this very issue, where if you look at in Houston, allowing for universal school choice would increase teacher salaries by as much as $12,000, right? Pretty substantial increase. Now, this could be different across the state. As you have rural areas, you may not see that much of an increase, but still you would see an increase because you are allowing for market forces to begin to work. And instead of only having one consumer of teaching services, you have multiple that's out there in the market. Instead of just having myself being a public school, now you have a private school here, another public school. You see what I mean? There's many other consumers in this overall market. And so now you have a little bit more of the negotiating power to determine what your wage would be. And teachers would also have more satisfaction in the sense that they could choose where they would like to teach. Maybe at a private school, public school, give them more of an opportunity to decide where they would like to work. And so finally here, teachers win from an efficient teaching market through school choice, not by public school control. And this is all not only from the consumer side, which I've talked about a lot today, but it's also from the producer side, right? Where you only have public schools, where many of our kids and youth are going to, that have no other opportunity or ability to go to a private school or to a home school. I was fortunate enough from kindergarten through second grade to go to private school, from third grade to sixth grade to go to public school, and then from seventh grade through 12th grade I went to homeschool. So I got a little bit of all these different worlds, and I'm fortunate enough to go on to get my PhD in economics. And I don't think without that education levels that I was able to choose from, that was the big thing, choice, and have the liberty to do that, I may not have been in the same situation, being able to talk to a great group of people that we have here today. And I really think school choice is something that we need to be looking forward to in the future, and something we need to do as soon as possible, because the best way to reduce poverty is to have a job. The best way to get a job is to be better educated. And so in order to do this, we really need to bring about school choice in the great state of Texas and lead the nation in this moving forward. So thank you.
Well, I think we kind of led into it. Let me just ask you real quick from different perspectives. So how can we treat and reward teachers in Texas as professionals, and what we in the legislature in Texas can do to make that happen? We'll just start on the end there, Dr. Walberg.
Well, I think that privatization might be the key, because it does decentralize educational decision-making. It gives teachers much more autonomy. I've argued that with a great deal of privatization, the teachers, there would be more money because of the savings and rules and regulations and things of that nature. There would be more money for teachers in private schools.
So based on what Mr. Malfaro brought up about comparing private schools today, how would you answer that question, that private schools today pay less?
Well, it is a fact. I don't disagree with it. Private school teachers get about half of what public school teachers do. I have all these numerical points are documented in the paper with the green cover. And the point of it is, why are those private school teachers staying in private schools? And a lot of it has to do with the psychology. A lot of it has to do with the psychology and the good morale that you find in private schools, where you have autonomous individuals who can teach the way they wish, or they can work with people that they wish to work with, or with a principal who agrees with them. So that's my answer.
Dr. Ginn, what do you think?
I think it really has to do with opening up the market and letting markets work. Private schools are paying less now, but you have a very small share of teachers working in the private school sector today. And if you're able to allow them to have the choice in different schools in which they could be employed, that would allow them to have more negotiating power as well, to where they could negotiate for a higher wage. And it's all about sending price signals. And currently in today's environment, the public school system has very few price signals, and many of those are redirecting teachers into different areas. Maybe instead of teaching in K through 12, they decide to go into a different area because wages are too low today, right? And so you have many of those individuals who are specialized in a particular area, like mathematics, who we would love to have in the K through 12 system, find another area to go in because those wages are higher in those sectors. And if we had school choice, I believe over time that we would see those wages rise and bring in better teachers in the process.
Okay, and Mr. Malfaro, from your perspective as a teacher and representing teachers, what is a fair way to measure performance of teachers, that we can actually pay the better ones more and encourage those who aren't doing the best to move on up or move out?
Senator, I don't get to answer the first question?
Well, you can respond. Well, that was your question. I asked the other two, basically. You laid that out there. You're welcome to respond to that, then I'll come back to that.
So what we did in Austin, and I think that this worked well, was to recognize that teacher quality is not a static thing, and that you have to develop systems within school districts that both support teacher quality and then find ways to recognize it. So Texas for a long time had funding for mentoring new teachers, and part of how we were able to, in Austin, create the REACH program was that we got a big state grant to pay teachers who are highly experienced to come out of the classroom full-time and work with a group of 10 to 12 new teachers and guide them through their first 2 years of practice. Because what Dr. Walberg said is very true about at the beginning of a career especially, a teacher is not in their first year saying, when's my next pay raise coming? They're very concerned about being good at what they do and building their capacity. And we need resources to be able to do that. It is a labor-intensive thing to take a new person, even if they've come out of a very high-quality teacher preparation program, and get them up to speed to be a good teacher. And I will tell you, the thing that I was the most proud of when I left Austin, having done the work on this project, was knowing that in 1987, I started as a classroom teacher, and I was handed a box full of teaching editions, and the door closed behind me, and I kept asking, I can't believe that I'm in this room by myself with these kids and nobody's even coming in to check. And it has really changed, and we fought for that as the professionals to say that's not good. It's not good for kids, and it's really unfair to adults that want to become good at this craft. But we've got to put resources back in, and the funding for mentoring has been eliminated from the budget.
Well, and I would just say on that, the new teachers, particularly what you referred to as the new teachers, but part of the educational for teachers includes student teaching. And I know they're even moving it earlier up in the curriculum so young people can actually see it firsthand. Is this really where I want to spend my career? But we do have that time in the classroom. So by the time you do get in a real classroom as a teacher, you have had some experience in that regard.
You have. There are some really good programs out there that actually give teachers a full year in the classroom under the guidance of someone else before we turn them loose with kids. But again, that's an upfront investment in having somebody who you hope for 30 plus years will deliver really high quality instruction.
So there's definitely value in training up and helping, particularly very good teachers, to help mentor the newer ones. But how do we get to that level of what do we need to do in Texas to bring the level of professionalism up and to measure what the teacher's providing those students in a year's worth of training? What is a fair way? You kind of point out what's not. What is a fair way to do it?
So we developed these, we took this idea from Denver and we modified it in Austin, this idea of student learning objectives, right? So I'm teaching middle school French. There's no STAR test for middle school French, but I have a scope and sequence, I have a curriculum, I have a body of knowledge and skills that I'm going to try to impart to students. So I have to have some way of knowing whether my kids have learned, right? Good teachers do assessment all the time. So what I'm going to do is sit down at the beginning of the year and look at where my kids are, my actual kids. So I'm going to also look and see how many kids do I have coming in that didn't pass the STAR test last time? What percentage of my kids are special needs kids that I'm going to have to do extra work with? And I set goals for my whole class that are measurable based on what I'm teaching them. And I sit down with my principal and I negotiate that out. Maybe the principal says your goals aren't high enough, or that you got to ask more of yourself. And you look at the data. And then I benchmark myself through the year, and at the end of the year, I sit back down with my principal and I say, you know, remember we talked about the rubrics that I was going to use? These are the essays kids took. This is the test that the kids took. And I feel like I met my objectives or I didn't. What we found with that is that teachers felt it was fair because they got to personalize their objectives based on what they were teaching, but it got reviewed, and actually in Austin, not only did the principal review it, they had these super teachers at the central office that reviewed these to make sure they met a rubric and a criteria. But what we found was that the teachers said, even if they didn't make their objectives in 1 year, they said, this made me a better teacher because it made me really think at the beginning of the year, where do I want my kids to go? And I tried really hard to get them there. I remember talking to one young math teacher. In the first year, he hit both his objectives and he got the money. And then the second year, he missed both objectives. And I said, what happened? Did you get to be a worse teacher? And he said, no, I set the bar higher.
Which is what we want.
Yep.
Real quick, do y'all want to respond to that question about fair way of measuring teacher success?
Well, I just think that a way to help improve the educational outcomes is really to start putting more money in the classroom. And instead of having to go through bureaucracy in other areas, maybe try to find ways, because as we saw earlier, when we're spending a tremendous amount per class, but a small portion of that's actually going to the teacher. And maybe that could help to improve their training as well. And with our current public school system, there's really not any incentive for them to come up with good metrics in order to measure the quality of the educational outcomes when you have no pricing mechanisms in place. So what is their incentive to do so? And I think that's one thing that you would notice with competition is that there would be better metrics to use, objective metrics, and that would be able to compare educational outcomes and to improve the education system over time.
Dr. Walberg?
I think I'm probably less patient with some of the arguments for teacher salaries than other people. And one of the reasons for it is that they do not have the training. They want to be called professionals. They're actually called quasi-professionals. But if you're a lawyer or a doctor, you first get a bachelor's degree in 4 years, and then you get another 3 or 4 years in training. In addition to that, if you're not a very good doctor, you lose your patients, and you may even lose your job. And the same thing is true of attorneys. So I think that we need that kind of accountability. And I think that one of the things to really recognize is that although teachers may only make, let's say, $30,000, $40,000, or $50,000 in the early years of teaching, they have a 9-month school year, or 10. They have 2 months off in the summer, and doctors and lawyers don't have that. And secondly, in most parts of the country, they have a 6-hour day. So if you multiply those things together, they're not putting the effort in, the required effort. And lastly, I think that the best form of accountability, and I'm, by the way, a defender of tests. I think tests are extremely important. We want our kids to learn. And, you know, the figures that I gave about the United States being mediocre compared to other countries is referred to in that paper with the green cover. But with high spending and poor performance, we have to have more radical kinds of things. And I think the most radical, the most promising is school choice.
Okay, so I won't be a politician that didn't tell the truth. I did say there'd be questions. How about a question? Who's got a burning question? Yes, sir. I don't even remember, y'all go, oh, anybody out there? No? We got one question. Go ahead, sir.
I could go crazy on this topic for an hour, but I won't.
All right, you don't have an hour.
It
so
couldn't be
that's
more
good.
clear to me that $12,000 per student, take $8,000 of that in a scholarship, and that's $160K for a 20-child classroom. So park those kids in a church somewhere that's empty 6 days a week, has kitchens, all those facilities, gym facilities. That's $160K to spend on, take half that. That's $80,000 to spend on a teacher salary. I don't see why we don't enact that immediately. Second point is that if I pay taxes for my kids, why can't I pick where those tax dollars are spent?
Okay.
Thank you.
Anyone else have a question on this? Yes, sir.
I'm loud enough. I appreciate what Mr. Malfaro was talking about. I did my last tour of duty in the classroom at Garcia Middle School before they switched over to an all-boys school. The problem with what he was talking about, it was great in the beginning, but in the end it morphed into something to where, for instance, this is anecdotal in my case, I had 3 REACH evaluators that came into my classroom. 2 of them had 3 years of experience. I had 20 plus. In order for me to reach the level to get the extra money, I had certain criteria, which is great. I don't mind doing that. But the problem is, he said the principal sits down with you, the principal didn't sit down with you. Now, this is anecdotal. So the problem is these programs start out well, but then all of a sudden, in order to evaluate me, I had 5 different people that make $60,000 or better a year to come into my classroom to make sure I'm teaching right. And so we got too much in the bureaucracy ring trying to, take half of my class, hire another teacher, and you got an easy classroom to teach. And so the problem is the follow through. And so we start out with great programs, but we wind up not following through. And the SLO that it was talking about, it's like, okay, everybody get their stuff in, throw it in there. And unfortunately, there were teachers that taught to the SLO so that they give this test at the beginning of the year, nobody knows anything, and they tell the kids, do just fill in the blank. Don't worry about working your answers out. At the end of the school year then, they have taught multiple times what they're going to be covering on that test so that they can make the marks. So the accountability part of it is something that needs to be addressed as well.
And I'll just add one more time, you brought up the problem, but how do we do it fairly? I'm not hearing that response. I'm sorry, we're out. I'll give you one question. You sat behind me for a whole session in education, so here's your chance.
So I earned my
You did. You earned your time on the mic.
So it's less theoretical, and from what I understand is actually being put in practice. And I completely agree there needs to be more support for teachers. And I'm curious about your thought. I know there's a lot of conversation surrounding putting some focus on the teaching institutions, first of all. And then also I'm curious, I understand that TEA is implementing T-tests. It's a pilot for new teacher eval. And it sounds like there were a lot of constructive conversations, and from what I understand, the teaching groups are pretty favorable about it. How do you guys feel about T-tests? Because it seems more comprehensive. It's less reliable than just the test. There is a huge amount of mentorship and evaluation and several different components that come into evaluating teachers and reward systems and such. So I'm curious about those 2 things.
Mr. Malfaro?
Okay. To all the questions, or
No, just
in
that
reverse
one.
order?
I didn't hear the other questions.
So on the teaching institutions, of course, we could put the poster boy for the Obama administration's Department of Ed back up there, Arnie Duncan, because now he's proposing an idea that the Texas legislature actually passed as a bill several years ago, and that is to use test scores of teachers in public schools to evaluate the teaching institutions that they came out of. Now, boy, you could teach a whole semester of econometrics on why there's so much noise in a model like that it's virtually impossible to make a causal relationship between the preparation program somebody came out of and where the kids are that they're teaching 3 years down the road. It just blows my mind that people think the world is so linear that you could do that. I think Texas does need to work with its teacher preparation institutions, but you have to remember this. So the the higher ed, the university-based programs come in for a lot of criticism. Some of it justly deserved, but we let anybody with a bachelor's degree and a pulse walk into a classroom in this state and call themselves a teacher. We have almost no standard for entry into the profession. So to the extent that I agree with Dr. Walberg on the question of professionalism, one way to deprofessionalize the profession is to say anybody can do it. And we've really done that. So I would say, do we need to do a better job with our colleges and universities that are preparing our next generation of teachers, getting them to put kids into the classrooms earlier to really get field experience? Absolutely. But, you know, Texas Teachers certifies more teachers than anybody else. And you can come back to this hotel in 2 weeks and sit through one of their hotel sessions and then do the rest of it online, and they'll stamp you and call you a teacher. I am not intimately acquainted with T-TEST. I know that TEA is piloting a couple of different evaluation models out there. And we have encouraged them to go slow and let school districts have a say in what evaluation tools they develop, rather than having the state pilot some stuff and then kind of do a one-size-fits-all. Because I do think that one of the benefits that we had in Austin was the teacher involvement in designing the systems that were going to be used to support and evaluate them.
We are out of time, but Dr. Walberg, since you traveled the furthest, I want to give you the last 30 seconds. and
Oh,
we're done.
thanks. Well, I want to defend multiple choice tests, and particularly multiple choice tests, because I've been a student of them for about a half century. And if you want to go to Harvard or Auburn or a lot of Texas universities, you have to take the SAT or the ACT, so you better get used to taking multiple choice tests. Secondly, if you want to get into the Army or you want to become a policeman in Chicago, you're going to take a multiple choice test. Now, it's very fashionable among educators to keep criticizing these tests, and I don't want to make it the only thing, but it is one input, and parents ought to know about it, and the principals ought to know about it, and the kids need to know where they stand too. In fact, continuous assessment has been found to be very valuable, because if you haven't mastered a particular topic, a computer can spot that, and the teacher or the computer itself can help you with that particular point. So I'd like to see even more emphasis on instruction, and I do want to offer one caution.
Dr. Walberg, you're almost eligible for the Senate with this filibuster.
Okay, well, last point. Atlanta, you may have read, has had a huge scandal involving more than 100 teachers. And the reason for that is they cheated on the tests, and so a lot of them were fired. So you have in businesses, you have accountants and you have auditors, and it's especially impressive as a third party comes in to look at the books. And I think we may need the same kind of thing in order to get a really good estimate of where our kids stand. Sorry.
Thank you very much. Give a welcome to our